The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
When the mandates were in place, I did not want to give in to the temptation of obtaining false vaccination documentation to work, because as an American, I have the right to my religious accommodation under the law. Our laws protect our religious freedom, and it should be fought for despite the cost. I and other workers in New York City, like me, have permanently lost jobs, homes, full pensions, scholarships, medical benefits, and more. Our 401ks, savings, and other assets have been depleted, and debt skyrocketed with little to no justice in pursuit of our religious freedom. Despite the pain, my faith sustains me, and it still does. I share this not just for myself, but for every believer facing similar choices today and tomorrow. Religious liberty must never cost a person's livelihood, home, or dignity in America. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, America. Good morning, world. Good morning, CHD. Welcome once again. My name is Michael Kane. I am the Director of Advocacy here at Children's Health Defense. Today, we're going to be speaking to Hermione Susana, who was a fired NYC worker. She testified before the Religious Liberty Commission. And then after that, we're going to have developmental goals and the UN agenda. Actually, it's going to go even deeper than that. Meryl Nass has Alex Newman on to talk about how the world really works with the explosion of the Jeffery Epstein files. There is so much now in the public record, so much to go through, so much to analyze. Meryl is going to be doing that. So don't go anywhere. We're going to have an amazing hour of CHD TV for you today. Now, Hermione first came on the scene in New York City with fired workers from Amy at Firsthand Media. Amy made the announcement that there was going to be a private sector session for the Religious Liberty Commission, and one person, one unvaccinated worker, would be testifying, and that is Hermione. She was originally interviewed a few years back on Firsthand Media by Amy, and a lot of you might know Amy and Firsthand Media is like the just number one spot for documenting fired unvaccinated workers. She has the New York Mandate podcast where she just has dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of hours of interviews of people who were fired for not getting the COVID shot, lives ruined, so much happened. I'm really excited to have Hermione on. She did amazing in the Religious Liberty Commission yesterday. And if you are a fired unvaccinated worker, you should send your story to RLC at usdoj.gov, RLC at usdoj.gov. The next month in March, they are going to be doing healthcare and religious liberty. So I think this is going to open the doors for many of our stories, such as Matt Connor from Bravest for Choice. Matt Connor and I were interviewed by Feds for Freedom. And we went over what's happening, why we are currently being stymied from getting our jobs back when there's simply just one vote that needs to happen, and fired unvaccinated public workers could go back to our jobs. Also, the religious exemption of vaccination for children, I am sure, will be discussed in March next month. As a lot of you know, I just had Sujata Gibson on CHD TV where we talked about Congress urging the DOJ to protect religious exemptions. That was led by Representative Stubbe from Florida, who sent a letter to the DOJ urging investigation into this issue. So again, everybody, if you were fired for not getting the COVID shot and you filed for a religious exemption, this is very specifically about religious discrimination. You should send an email to rlc@usdoj.gov. Let them know if you're interested in testifying. But even if you can't go to DC and testify, you should still send your story. We want hundreds, we want thousands of stories going to the DOJ so they see this is a national issue, that we must protect people's bodily autonomy and religious liberty rights. One or two other things in news before we get to Hermione. I'm really excited to talk to her. She did an amazing job yesterday. We just showed that one little clip there. Mary Holland was in New Hampshire at the Capitol, at the State House, giving testimony. I believe there was a 2-minute limit to what she was allowed to say, but we have her full testimony. Let's show that.
What Idaho has done, what Florida is considering, is on the right side of history. There's no question about this. And children's health is not a partisan issue. It was the Obama administration that talked about precision medicine, that it needs to be tailored to the individual. It is the Trump administration that's talking about making America healthy again. 50% of American children have some kind of chronic health condition, whether it's asthma, severe allergies, ADHD, autism, apraxia, dyspraxia. You all know what they are. This is the problem. 90% of America's health budget goes to chronic disease. It does not go to infectious disease. Infectious disease is real. If parents want to vaccinate against measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, they will have that ability. And that is what most developed countries do, or at least very many of them. Sweden, Japan, as we've heard, Denmark. These are recommendations, and parents follow them because they're asking for trust. They're not being coerced. Mandates are coercion, they're government coercion, and there's corporate liability. There's really no feedback loop in the system we have. So basically, that's what I want to say. The courts are now shifting. It looks like the courts are not going to say rational basis, governments, you can do whatever you want on mandates. They're saying we're going to apply strict scrutiny. That's coming from the Supreme Court.
15 seconds, please wrap.
So governments are going to have to use the least restrictive means possible in looking at these impingements on fundamental rights that includes bodily autonomy, parental rights, and free exercise of religion.
Mary Holland at the State House in New Hampshire, advocating for the Medical Freedom Act in New Hampshire. That's the act that is the first one passed because of Leslie Manookian in Idaho, the Idaho Medical Freedom Act. Now there's a coalition of some 15, 16 groups led by Stand for Health Freedom and Health Freedom Defense Fund trying to get medical freedom acts passed all across the country to end all medical mandates, vaccine mandates, mask mandates, quarantine mandates of healthy people. So it's good to see the CEO of Children's Health Defense fighting for that bill in New Hampshire. If you want to see Mary Holland speak and you are in New York or in the Northeast, come March 24th to Albany, New York, to the Capitol. Rally at the Capitol. We need everybody there. We need moms. We need homeschoolers. We need fired unvaccinated workers. And we especially need the vaccine injured. We are going to be highlighting many stories of vaccine injury on that day. So everybody interested in medical freedom, we need you at the Capitol in Albany, March 24th. Keep following here. Follow teachersforchoice.substack.com. Follow Children's Health Defense. We're going to get you all the information about that rally day. Okay, that's it for the news. And with that, it is my honor and pleasure to bring on Hermione to discuss her testimony at the Religious Liberty Commission. Hermione, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you, Michael. It's been great even being on your show, and thank you for all that you do for us.
Thank you so much for stepping up and doing this. I watched remotely. I got the C-SPAN live feed, actually, and I saw your testimony. It was just absolutely fantastic. You were fired from the private sector because you refused to get the COVID shot because you have sincerely held religious beliefs against that. But before we get into your story, we're going to do that. How did this opportunity arise for you? How did you get selected to testify?
Actually, Amy reached out to me and told me that the DOJ was looking for people in the private sector who was fired because they were unvaccinated. So I just said, yes, I'll join. And then Elise Young, I interviewed with her first, an amazing person. And from there, she had recommended that I would go and speak to the contact at the commission.
Shout out to Amy, Firsthand Media, who's been covering everything that happens in New York City related to the tragedy of vaccine mandates and what it's done to the working class here. And shout out to Elise. Elise heads Guiding the Impact and has been doing a lot of work working closely with the Religious Liberty Commission, especially fighting for those of us who have sincerely held religious beliefs when it comes to vaccination. Hermione, tell us a little bit about your story. Where did you work? What happened to you?
So I worked at 3 locations, Yankee Stadium, Madison Square Garden, and the Barclays Center. Madison Square Garden was one of the first employers to institute a vaccine mandate. So in May 2021, they had contacted us and told us that they're going to institute a mandate, and we can submit either a medical accommodation or religious accommodation by July of that year. I submitted my religious accommodation. It was denied, actually. So I was one of the first people to be fired because I wasn't vaccinated. Of course, subsequently, you know about New York City's mandate that came in August 2021. So the other 2 locations I worked at was the Barclays Center. I had, it was an indoor venue, so completely indoor. So I lost that job in September. And because where I worked at Yankee Stadium was indoor-outdoor, I was allowed to work until, of course, December was the nail in the coffin. So I had lost everything, all my 3 jobs. But I reached out to the union throughout the whole time. That's Unite Here Local 100, and they were supposed to file grievances. They never did. And also they were supposed to negotiate on our behalf. They didn't do it. And they represented me at all 3 locations. I fought with emails, calling and everything else. But when the city, by January 2022, I just couldn't stay any longer. So I lost everything. I lost my apartment. So I had to move down with family in Georgia to just make it through. So it's the story of so many of us. Then I still wanted to fight. And I fought. And so when the city lifted for the private sector, September, they made the announcement. So November 1st, the Barclays Center did bring us back immediately, which was nice. And but it took a long time to get my job back at Yankee Stadium. I don't work directly for the Yankees, but of course, one of the sub contractors, and it took a very long time for that. Just want to note that what makes my case a little unique is that if you remember, they exempted non-resident performers and athletes they could come in despite the mandates and perform unvaccinated. So it was the same locations where I was at, and so that made the situation quite unique. The city actually put in there, and then subsequently it was for patrons, and they still wouldn't let us in. And then the last one was, of course, the resident performers and athletes. They gave exemptions to them, and it was the winter of 2022, and still held on that we couldn't work.
Yeah, I remember that very well. Then Mayor Eric Adams giving a carve out to all performers. So basketball players, baseball players, musicians, strippers, all could work unvaccinated. But those that were, tending to their needs, that were, working the bar, firefighters, cops, teachers, no. None of us were able to get any sort of just bonkers. I mean, it's just bananas where this this thing sent us to and allowed this completely illogical rollout of just ramrodding through our civil liberties. Hermione, you said that you moved to Georgia, but I'm assuming you were able to move back. Is that correct?
It was a process, to be honest with you. I was couch surfing. My friends let me stay with them. Because the Barclays Center was my first job. Remember, I had 3. Right. So it was hard to kind of get around that. And I would say when I got Yankee back, that job, I was able to like rent a room, which I continue to do.
Yeah, I mean, so many stories of couch surfing, living in your parents' basement, breaking up with long relationships, divorces, moving
Yeah.
out of the city, moving out of the state, moving out of the country. I even know of 3 people that were made completely homeless, one living in his car, the other in the shelter system. People don't really truly know the depths of what happened. To those of us who stood our ground on our principles, who had something we truly believed in. And so I really do feel your pain. I went through similar things. Thankfully, I was able to stay here, thanks to Children's Health Defense, actually. I very luckily was able to get employed by them. And in a lot of ways, they saved me and saved my family. Hermione, I want to now focus a little bit on yesterday, the Religious Liberty Commission. We've kind of been waiting for the RLC to take on the issue of vaccines, healthcare, and religious liberty, because, it was just right over exactly what we have done. And you were the very first unvaccinated worker to be called to testify. So it's pretty exciting for all of us, in New York City, in Los Angeles, anybody paying attention. And it looks like next month they're going to do a whole day on healthcare and religious liberty. But talk to us about yesterday being in DC, what the experience was like for you.
The experience was amazing. I thank the commission for letting me speak. They did take what I had to say very seriously. They asked me to prepare, to share a lot into a little few minutes, but they are taking my call and everybody else call to religious freedom and seriously. I would strongly encourage anyone who has a similar situation like myself to really reach out. When I got the call, when I spoke to Lise, I was like, okay. And I spoke to the person at the commission and told her my story, and she responded right away. They get back to you very quickly, but if you looked at who was on the stage, it was amazing. I was kind of starstruck, but they are going to take everything that has been going on through the commission in a special session to the president directly. And they're actually making recommendations, strong recommendations and changes. So that's why it's a little different than us. It's just not someone just, listening to what happened to us, but they're taking what we're saying and making recommendations for change. So that's what's different. And I strongly encourage people to go. I mean, my panel had Ambassador Brownback on it, So I spoke to him afterwards, and he shared a lot on the stage, but he was very serious. And we spoke afterwards. It was a very long session, so they had to quickly say they told us and reassured us that they're going to do something about it. And they have strong recommendations, but the experts on the panel on both sides were amazing. So I would strongly encourage people just to step up. Don't fear, especially if you're a person of faith. You should not fear, because God is with you. So, and he blessed me with this opportunity. They do take it seriously. Like I said, they flew me out. And they provided lodging for me, which I really appreciated. So they understand.
Oh, that's excellent. So I agree with Hermione here. Everybody should email rlc@usdoj.gov and send your story. If you were a worker fired unvaccinated, fired over the vaccine mandate, let them know if you're available to testify in DC, or if you're not. Just simply say that in the email and then tell them your story, because they don't just want testimony from people like Hermione, who was able to actually go to DC. They also want to put together all of these stories so they can have a full body, a full weight of what actually happened during COVID and before. Because also, if you have a child who was kicked out of school because the religious exemption of vaccination was canceled or never existed in West Virginia, in Connecticut, New York, Maine, in California, you too should email rlc@usdoj.gov. Hermione, what do you want them to do? right? So they're coming up with suggestions. They are going to make recommendations. The years are passing. The years are passing by. You're back at your job. All solved. Everything's all back to normal, right? I mean, I'm being facetious, but
Yeah, that's okay.
if you had a magic wand, right, and if you could have whatever you thought could happen, what do you think the RLC should recommend? What do you think the federal government should do?
I think one of the things that I talked about was just our fight just sitting in appellate courts and no one taking it seriously, especially when states like New York City, in New York State, sorry, and especially in New York City, it tends to be where no one's paying attention. But I also want the religious accommodations to be taken seriously, right? So if we submit them, it should be respected, and it should be the employers, especially the private sector, of course, the city should take that seriously. I think that that's something that we did not see. Also, being discriminated against, right? How can athletes and performers can go in for no reason just because they can sing or they can, bounce a basketball, and I'm in the same exact place and there is no oversight. So whatever department can oversee anything like that happening for us in New York City. But and also the time frame with the EEOC, I didn't know about it. I'm a union employee, so they always encourage you to go to your union. But when your union doesn't do anything, what can we go there? I did the file charges with the NLRB, but that didn't work. So I mean, there is a lot of we just need transparency, and help. So I think that that's some of it, but I'm sure there's more to it. But this is what I can come up with right now.
Oh no, I think that's fantastic. I'll just add a couple other ones. I think since the
Yes,
RLC is under the Department of Justice, we're emailing the DOJ when you're asking. I think the Department of Justice needs to intervene. I think there's lawsuits that are being suggested to the Department of Justice. Get involved, become a party to those lawsuits, sue New York City over what they've done. There's plenty of lawsuits for the DOJ to intervene within. And, if you have Children's Health Defense suing, that's good. But if you have Children's Health Defense and the DOJ suing on a lawsuit, it has a much different impact on the judges. Hermione, I want to just draw attention and thank you that yesterday in your testimony, you made sure to point out that public sector workers actually had some victories. We've had some victories in the court, but as you just said, they've been appealed and they're stopping our victories in that appeal process. I'm still not back to work now, even though one of my cases in state court did win. It's just going through years of the appellate process. So on behalf of thousands of public sector workers as well, too, thank you so much. I know they focused on the private yesterday, but it really means a lot to us that you brought us up as well, too. We're kind of all in the same boat here at the end of the day right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael, and God bless you for everything that you do. You're a hard worker, and we really appreciate that.
Thank you. And thank you so much, because without you and thousands like you, I'm just a crazy fired teacher screaming on a podcast. You need every single one of us play our role. So thank you so much. You did something historic and important yesterday. So again, thank you so much. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you again.
All right. So there it is. Behind the scenes, a lot of you might not know, we've been waiting for the Religious Liberty Commission to address vaccination, and they haven't. And yesterday they did, just with one individual testifying. They had the majority of the hearing yesterday about anti-Semitism, and also religious bias in the private sector. So it was great to see we had Hermione get in. And then they all said in March, it's coming. So make sure to send those emails. Make sure your voice is heard. And right now, don't go anywhere. This is going to be a good one. You want to watch this one. Have you heard of this guy named Jeffrey Epstein? Have you seen any of the 3 million documents flooding the internet and the public record now that are just revealing shocking things, many of which we've suspected, we've thought but now we got some hard proof really connecting some dots. Well, Meryl Nass is going to take you into that wild ride. Let's bring it to Meryl.
Good morning, CHD. It is February 10th, and I have a very special guest today. Sometimes I say that. This time I really, really mean it. Alex Newman, who, if you don't know him, you need to get to know him. He is a young man who connects all sorts of things together, who is expert on vaccine issues, school choice, freedom in general, and the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2021, Agenda 2030, the entire way that the deep state and the New World Order is trying to basically put a noose around our necks and control us. He writes for the Liberty Sentinel. He has written some important books. He does many podcasts. And today we're going to talk about the origins of the current efforts to create a new world order using the Sustainable Development Goals, these various different agendas. Currently, we're in Agenda 2030. Why they were chosen and the important role of Jeffrey Epstein in helping to build the framework around which these basically false narratives were built to steal our money, to create crazy ideas about how the world works, how climate change is going to destroy the world, and how we desperately need to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on pandemics and biowarfare, when in fact it is the deep state creating those things. So I'm just going to bring on Alex and let him tell us sort of from the beginning how these Sustainable Development Goals and their precursors came to be, and then talk about the role of Jeffrey Epstein in them. So go ahead, please, Alex.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Meryl, and thanks to all the good folks at Children's Health Defense. I am a huge supporter of your work and very, very grateful for the work you do. The Sustainable Development Goals is really just the latest iteration of the UN's agenda. I mean, it goes back 80 years to the founding of the UN. In fact, it goes back even further than that. They tried before that with the League of Nations, and you can trace the history of this globalist movement back long before that. But the Sustainable Development Goals, when they were approved at the UN General Assembly in 2015, in other words, every government in the world, every member state of the United Nations agreed to this. The head of the UN General Assembly at that time, Peter Thompson, called it the Master Plan for Humanity. And that was kind of a dead giveaway. You'd think that should be on the front page of every newspaper, that every government in the world came together and agreed to a new Master Plan for Humanity. But we had almost total silence from the media. Maybe a few small articles about UN agrees to plan for sustainability, which people kind of glance at and read right over. But if you read them, they're very, very significant. They deal with every area of life. They deal with the environment, with the economy, with education, with health. Obviously, goal number 3 deals with health, vaccines for everybody, abortions for everybody. I mean, you name it, it's in there. And taken together, it is essentially a recipe for global totalitarianism run by the United Nations and its specialized agencies. UNESCO handles education, the World Health Organization handles healthcare, and on down the line. So there is some nice window dressing in there so that people who oppose it sound mean and grumpy. Oh, you don't want to end world hunger? You don't want to end world poverty? But I encourage people to just think about this for a minute. If you give the United Nations a blank check on your money and your liberty to solve world hunger or solve global poverty, you are essentially handing all of your individual sovereignty, all of your liberty, and all of your national sovereignty over to an organization that is literally run by dictatorships, right? A huge percentage of the UN's member states are literal mass murdering dictatorships. Many of the others are kleptocracies in the truest sense of the term. And then you look at the bureaucrats who staff these organizations. They are absolutely abominable. There are decent people there. I know them. They send me information, and I'm grateful for them. But the UN itself is a pit, a cesspool of degeneracy. And you don't have to believe me. Their own numbers show that UN troops raped about 60,000 women and children in just the 10-year period running up to about 2020. And of course, they all have diplomatic immunity. So long story short, Sustainable Development Goals, extremely dangerous 15-year plan for the world by the UN. It fits into the larger context of the 21st Century Plan, which they call Agenda 21, adopted back in 1992 in Rio by, again, all the governments in the world. But it is a plan that would eliminate human freedom as we know it. It would eliminate national sovereignty, and it would eliminate the things that many of the folks who watch CHD TV are concerned about, including your individual rights to control your own health care, oversee the health care of your children.
Right. So what it seems to me in this recent iteration, since we know people have been trying to take control of the world and its resources and its money for a very long time, starting even before Alexander the Great, and Kublai Khan or Genghis Khan. What I know is that in this recent iteration, David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski and others formed the Trilateral Commission in 1973. They also supported and held a conference on the ecology of the world in 1972 in Stockholm. And Maurice Strong was managing that and then became the director of the UN Environmental Program a year or two later. And so at that point, it was all about using environmentalism and climate change to an extent. They weren't sure whether we were getting colder or getting hotter. So during the 70s, they were going back and forth with scares about both of them. And then eventually they settled on global warming. And then they came up with the brilliant idea that they could, if they said carbon dioxide was the problem, they could start taxing, everybody on their carbon dioxide. And in fact, the UN has started to do that last year with maritime shipping. So they're attempting to tax ships that bring goods around the world based on the amount of carbon dioxide they release. Anyway, so that worked for a long time. Then that was the 70s and 80s. And then around 1990, David Rockefeller approached Jeffrey Epstein, who was only in his early 30s, and said, would you like to join the Trilateral Commission? Trilateral Commission is an organization that with the Bilderbergers is among the most exclusive in the entire world and is designed to help plan, world conquest by the most rich and influential people in the world. Trilateral Commission being from three regions, Europe, the United States, and Japan. Now, why would David Rockefeller pick this 32-year-old Jeffrey Epstein and put him into an organization filled with people in their 60s and 70s mostly? That was very curious. Another thing that happened in the 1990s after President Clinton came in was a pivot, not away from climate change and global warming, but in addition to, we were now supposed to be frightened of pandemics and biological warfare. And that gave the globalists sort of another target with which they could control populations. And I'll let you go on from there.
There's so much there to build on, Meryl. Thank you for that. Let's start with the climate change scare, because it actually merges very nicely with the public health fear-mongering that we're seeing. I go to these UN climate summits virtually every year. I just got back from Brazil a couple months ago. I was there for the COP30. The year before that, I was in Azerbaijan. The year before that, I was on the Arabian Peninsula. The year before that, we were in Egypt. So I follow the UN's climate movement, and it is actually fundamental to the whole plan to erode national sovereignty, steal our liberty, and build this totalitarian system they call a new world order. It is entirely a fabrication from a scientific perspective. The notion that the carbon dioxide we exhale, that we produce doing just regular human activities, the notion that that's pollution and is going to destroy us, and that paying taxes to the UN is going to stop that, is utterly ridiculous from a scientific perspective. But from the totalitarian perspective, it's positively brilliant, because if you can convince people the gas they exhale is pollution, you can control every single thing that they do. You can tax, you can regulate, and you can stop every human activity. So that's very important. And what has happened in recent years is the two threats, public health and climate change, have merged into one. I was in Azerbaijan, as I mentioned, just a year and a half ago, more or less, when they had the COP29. And the head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, stands up in front of the whole place and says climate change is now the most significant public health threat in the world. So I catch up with the WHO's Director of Climate Change and Public Health, very nice lady, Dr. Neda was her name. And I asked her on camera, could you explain to us, please, how climate change is the biggest public health threat in the world? And she says, well, climate change equals global warming, and global warming equals mosquitoes, and therefore you need to pay taxes to the UN in so many words. I lived in Scandinavia. There's a lot of mosquitoes up in the far north of Scandinavia where it's incredibly cold. So none of this makes any sense at all. But from a totalitarian perspective, they tell you openly what they're doing. Global problems require global solutions. And so invisible viruses that we can't see and invisible climate change that we can't see are perfect pretext for advancing this nefarious agenda. Epstein became a more and more important player. The Trilateral Commission obviously has been huge. The entire environmental movement really traces back to the Rockefeller dynasty, which quite ironically made its fortune in oil. Even before they came up with the climate change fraud, they were arguing that we were going to run out of oil. They say, oh, we have peak oil. We're not going to have energy anymore. We're going to have to radically restructure our economy so that the government controls everything, so that you don't have any freedom. You need less money. And of course, that was an obvious fraud. We have more proven oil reserves today than we did when they were arguing that back in the 1960s and 70s. So they came up with, global cooling and then global warming and then climate change. But the goal is ultimately to restrict our energy use, which of course would restrict our economic activity, and build up these international institutions. You mentioned the very, very important development from last year, where the UN's International Maritime Organization, one of their specialized agencies, came up with the proposal, which was approved, by the way, to implement the first ever direct global taxes on humanity. See, that's one of the things that has restrained the UN more than anything else, is the fact that if it wants money, it must ask member states. It must ask the national governments for money. Under this plan, which was approved, by the way, it was only stopped because Trump came in and said, if you do this, we're going to sanction you. We're going to, you're going to regret doing this. So for now, they've kicked the can down the road. But the reason they were doing that was so that they could stick their money funnel into humanity and start taxing directly. And then there would be no longer any restraint on what the UN could do. So where does the Trilateral Commission fit into this? Well, Rockefeller has been a master at setting up and creating and leading organizations that kind of behind the scenes will lead this push and bring all the opinion molders, the policymakers to the table to come up with kind of a unified messaging and then unified policy. Bilderberg, obviously Rockefeller has been critical in Bilderberg. Rockefeller and as you pointed out, Zbigniew Brzezinski actually created the Trilateral Commission. And what the Trilateral Commission did was it brought the top-level policy and opinion molders from Japan, from Europe, and from North America together. And a lot of it was based on Zbigniew Brzezinski's books. He was kind of an obscure professor at Columbia University. And when Rockefeller got a hold of his books, things like America's Role in the Technotronic Age, big things started happening. I think some light bulbs went off in Rockefeller's head. He says, ooh, this will work perfectly. And to kind of summarize what Zbigniew Brzezinski was arguing, he said, humanity needs to evolve to a new system. He said, Marxism is like the next step in that evolution. Obviously, there's some problems in the Soviet Union, but we can work through those. But eventually, he argued that we need to move towards something, a movement that actually emerged at Columbia University, a movement toward technocracy, where you get rid of representative government, you get rid of the market, and you replace that with rule by experts, ruled by scientists, ruled by engineers. And so all this merges together with Jeffrey Epstein's kind of role in all this, in bringing these people to the table, getting information on them that can be used to blackmail them. And of course, Epstein, as the latest release of 3 million documents shows, was directly connected to one of the most powerful families in the world, the Rothschild family. The relationship goes back many years. We have an email in 2015 where the Rothschild group is promising him $25 million to move forward with this agenda. So all of this taken to, and by the way, George Soros, people talk a lot about George Soros. He also got his money to start up his quantum fund from the Rothschild banking dynasty. And for the folks who aren't familiar with the Rothschild banking dynasty, one of their apologists for this family, his name is Niall Ferguson. He's kind of like a court historian, if you will. And occasionally he's got a clever thing or two to say. But he wrote a book on the Rothschild dynasty. He called it The World's Bankers. And he argues, kind of cavalierly, that the Rothschild banking dynasty decided the outcome of the Napoleonic Wars by putting their financial muscle behind the British government. Now, that's 200 years ago. What kind of family has the power to decide the outcome of a war between the two most powerful governments on the face of the earth? That's the level of power that we're dealing with here. The Rothschilds are still intimately involved with the United Nations. In fact, I wrote an article several years ago when Baron Erich de Rothschild, one of the bigwigs from the family, was promoting a lady called Irina Bokova to be the next Secretary General of the UN. Now, she's a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. Her father was on the Politburo of the Bulgarian Communist Party. She served as acting foreign minister for the Bulgarian Communist regime as they were slaughtering hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Why would the Rothschilds be promoting a communist associated with a mass murdering dictatorship to lead the global organization that's coming up with master plans for humanity? And I'll say one more thing, Meryl, and then hand it back to you. The World Economic Forum, which Jeffrey Epstein was very close to this, was a critical part of this whole agenda. In fact, in 2019, the World Economic Forum signed what the UN and the World Economic Forum described as a strategic partnership to bring the business community to the table on the Sustainable Development Goals. So they've realized that they need what they themselves call a three-legged stool approach. It's not enough to just have government. It's not enough to just have the politics. They also need the second leg of the stool being business and the third leg of the stool being religion. And so we're watching now a coordinated takeover attempt of all these institutions. And to give you kind of just a graphic image of what this looks like, I mentioned I just got back from Brazil. This is the cover picture that we took there. This was taken by Andrew Muller. It is the official guardian spirit of the COP30 climate summit. It was given by the Chinese Communist Party. They say it's a dragon spirit combined with a jaguar spirit, and you see it's holding the world in its hands with COP30 on there. And the spiritual element of this was out of the closet more than I've ever seen it before. Almost every session was starting off with like prayers to the river gods and the rock gods and the Mother Earth and these kinds of things. So the religions of the world are coming together in a very real way behind the UN, behind the climate agenda, and behind these public health measures, so-called.
So this was a plan for a long time. Maurice Strong, who was another associate of David Rockefeller, tried to create a sort of New Age religion.
Yep.
He died in 2015, but he was active, as I said, from the 1960s onward till 2015. He was another guy who made his wealth in the oil business. He worked closely with the UN. He had all sorts of roles at the UN with the World Economic Forum and other globalist organizations. He basically created a lot of the ideas, including sustainable development, that we're having to deal with now and unpack and get rid of. But he was trying to come up with a religion, and then I think it was Lawrence Rockefeller was working with him, and they actually had a document that was created that they were hoping was going to replace the Ten Commandments.
Yep.
And they had people walk it from, I don't know, somewhere in upper New York State or Vermont or somewhere to the United Nations in its own ark.
Yes, the Ark of Hope, a knockoff of the Ark of the Covenant. And Meryl, I was in Egypt in 2022 for the UN Climate Summit, and they had this unbelievable ceremony. This, again, should have been on the front page of every newspaper. It should have been on every network, TV network. All these religious leaders, the Vatican was represented, the Orthodox churches were represented, the evangelical churches, Protestant churches were represented, the leaders of Islam, leaders of Judaism, leaders of Hinduism, leaders of Shinto. They brought in all kinds of different pagan leaders from Latin America and things like this. They walked up to the top of Mount Sinai. And first they did what they call a climate repentance ceremony, where they repented to the climate deities for their carbon footprint and their stake and their air travel and things like this. Quite bizarre. And then they brought out the new and supposedly improved 10 Commandments. And they had this ritual where the guy holding them, kind of like Moses, smashed them on the floor. And they demanded that governments take more action. And if you read these 10 Commandments, it is perfectly in line with what the UN is trying to do here. They're trying to redefine morality. Your sin is no longer, your murder, your lying, your cheating, your stealing. Your sin is your carbon footprint, right? Your CO2 emissions. And the way you get rid of your guilt from this is you have to give the UN money. You have to buy carbon credits from Al Gore. And when you look at this in its totality, it is unbelievably significant. In fact, I think it's one of the most significant things happening in the world today is this effort to hijack all the religions of the world, all the big businesses of the world, and all the governments of the world in lockstep to make the world look, frankly, a lot more like communist China. The same year that Rockefeller started the Trilateral Commission, he came back from China. This was 1973, and he wrote a piece for the New York Times. It was called From a China Travel. You can still find it in the New York Times archives today. And he says, the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history, right? That's the model for the global system that they want. And I'll remind the viewers, Maurice Strong, who you mentioned, died in China because he was under investigation in the West for all sorts of criminal activities. And of course, Epstein right there in the middle of it, with Bill Gates. That's where, the COVID. If you look at the Epstein and Bill Gates emails, it's very clear they were working with the WHO. The WHO was essentially under the de facto control of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And what they did to the Chinese people during COVID is what they want to do to all of us. And I mean, I just can't emphasize strongly enough. We must not allow this to happen.
Yeah. Excuse me. So we have to realize that at the top of any organization are bureaucrats and people who have striven to climb to the top, and so that's true of religions as well as everything else and business. And so just like many of our religions, including the Catholics, the Lutherans, and the Jews, were paid off many millions of dollars, actually by the U.S. taxpayer, laundering the money through UN agencies to pay for illegal immigrants to come into our country and to go to other countries in Europe and other places. And so the churches were central in this role because that sort of made it kosher. That gave a patina of goodness to the whole process. So when we understand that the religions were doing that and making money hand over fist doing it, it makes more sense that they're willing to basically eschew and disregard their basic tenets to get a piece of the action at the UN, pretending they're going to create a new, better religion that is focused on ecology, equity, fairness, and taking care of the planet.
Yeah. And they all agreed, by the way, Meryl, to the Sustainable Development Goals. In 2019, yes. There was a meeting in Germany of an organization called Religions for Peace. The recently departed leader, Dr. Azza Karam, explained on camera in Egypt at this UN climate summit that it's the UN of religions representing all religions. And they all got together, 2019, signed a document that said, we commit to human development as set forth in the UN 2030 Agenda Sustainable Development Goals. So they've got all the big religious institutions, all the big businesses, and all of the governments of the world publicly on record signing up for this agenda, and not 1 in 1,000 Americans knows anything about it.
Yes. And okay, so let's go on. So why is all this happening? Because you can make money. You can make a lot of money. So in addition to taking over the world, you can make a lot of money in the process. Mark Carney said that, that global warming and climate change offered a tremendous opportunity for investments. And Jeffrey Epstein was there too. So one of his roles, he had a lot of roles. One was blackmail. That looks like it was a minor role, actually. Because with many of the people who are in the Epstein files, it had nothing to do with sex. It was all about business. It was about trading secrets. As Catherine Austin Fitts says, when she was an investment banker, what they traded on were secrets. The way you made money was to know a secret before somebody else knew it and be able to, invest or sell or buy based on that secret information. So anyway, what Epstein was doing was getting information from people like Lord Mandelbaum, who has now lost his ambassadorship to the U.S., has been completely disgraced, is being investigated in the UK, and is probably going to pull down the current head of the Labour government in the UK. Well, he was just giving Jeffrey Epstein information about what was going on behind the scenes ahead of time. Jeffrey Epstein then was able to share that information and pay off Mandelson. So he would send Mandelson, $75,000 or whatever every so often in exchange for this. But the other thing Epstein was doing was paying off scientists to build out the architecture to financially invest in these false narratives. So to invest in climate change and to invest in pandemic preparedness and bioterrorism. Well, you can create industries around this. I mean, these are multi-billion dollar industries if you want to build them, even though they're based on false concepts. And he apparently was brilliant at connecting people and working with others to figure out what is going to be necessary. How do we build the CBDCs? How do we build the currencies? How do we connect the countries together? How do we make money on this? How do we who do we get to invest? If we start getting the Gates Foundation, then can we bring in more foundations, and then we can bring in industry, and we can pull in tens of billions of dollars by creating these investment products based on the threat of pandemics or biological warfare. And people need to realize that that's why he was getting all this money. So people who were getting information and favors from him were paying him off, like the Rothschilds, and then he was paying off people from whom he was getting information and favors and creating the superstructure to make this new world order actually work. So I'll leave it to you again.
Well, and I know we're just about out of time, but Arizona State University is.
No, we actually have some more time. We have 10 minutes.
Oh,
so
okay, fantastic.
Ignore that.
Okay, very good. So Arizona State University is critical to understanding this. That is where a guy called Michael Crow, his cover job is president of Arizona State University. His real job is chairman of In-Q-Tel. This is the investment arm of the intelligence community. ASU is the most mentioned university in the Epstein Files by far, and it's right where the sustainable development transformation is happening. It's also where a lot of the cutting edge work in public health, genetic engineering, transhumanism is all taking place. And you're exactly right. They are spinning off massive industries through these programs that they're running at Arizona State University. And the rabbit hole goes really, really deep here. I mean, people think mRNA hijacking the protein manufacturing machinery of your cells is out there, and yet it is. But what they are working on at Arizona State University, people like Michael Crow, people like George Post, his sidekick in all of this, is absolutely mind-blowing. They're talking about, openly, by the way, this isn't just like me connecting dots, they're openly talking about stuff like directed evolution, right? We're going to seize control of evolution, and we will direct it henceforth. And this intersects, of course, with the United Nations and the Convention on Biological Diversity. People assume biological diversity, we're going to save some lizard in the Amazon rainforest. So that again, is a cover story. They themselves will tell you they're harvesting genetic data on every type of organism they can find on this planet. They're going to license it from nation states, so you get kind of governments involved, and then they are going to mix and match it to create all kinds of monstrous and hideous creatures. Bill Gates, he comes from the technology world, but he understands the real money, and by the way, his dad was involved in intellectual property. He understands the real money is intellectual property. And the Supreme Court in the United States has already decreed that you can own new forms of DNA. If these scientists working with Epstein and his buddies through Harvard, through ASU, through other leading institutions, if they can come up with new genetic codes, bringing together multiple types of organisms, and by the way, they're doing this already in laboratories. You can find it in the mainstream news. They're injecting human DNA into mice, mouse DNA into pigs. Then they can own life itself. So the rabbit hole goes really, really deep here. It is very uncomfortable to learn about the kinds of things these people are doing. And by the way, these are the things that they talk publicly about that they are doing. Imagine the things going on in the underground laboratories in China or that are being operated by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. The stuff gets really, really scary. And some of it now is coming out because of these Epstein files. So that is, I think, the main encouraging element of all this, is that now the public is getting a little glimpse of what was going on behind the curtain. And hopefully that'll give us the ammunition we need to make this stop.
Yes, exactly. So Jeffrey Epstein was very interested in genetics. You know, he wanted to breed people. He paid for an institute. He paid for the entire institute at Harvard for studying evolutionary genetics, whatever that is. And we have to realize that you talked about a three-legged stool. Well, you know, to build a new world order takes many legs of a stool. And these people, the David Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Epsteins, all the people who were intimately involved in this were building all the different legs of the stool at the same time. And they never knew for sure that any one leg would come to fruition and actually work. But they were building so many of them that eventually they would have enough that the stool was going to stand on its own feet, how many feet that was. I hope I'm being clear. But
Absolutely.
You know, am I?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think that's a perfect way of describing it, right? They've got all these irons in the fire. They don't know, is this project going to work? Is that project going to work? Are they going to believe the global warming stuff? But, you know, they throw everything at us, like throwing spaghetti at the wall, wait till one sticks, and they say, aha, we've got it. That'll be the strategy.
Exactly. And so, and being able to inject us with vaccines, you know, where they can control what's in those vaccines is you know, very important part of this. But even if they can't get away with injecting us with unknown vaccines, they did it once. They may have, you know, blown their wad on that one. We may never accept it again, or some people will. But they can still build out this thing without the vaccines as long as they can control our movements, or as long as they can control our money. So all of these different pieces are being built out at the same time, and we're getting very close to the end. And that may be why Jeffrey Epstein, you know, died, if in fact he died. You know, I suspect he died because he knew a lot. And if he was going to spill his guts, that would have been a real problem for this whole program. But, you know, maybe he's alive somewhere and he's had some plastic surgery. In any event, they are very close to completing many of the legs of this stool. And so now is the time. You briefly mentioned at the beginning having a constitutional convention, and we should just tell the audience what happens when you have a constitutional convention. You may have it just for one thing. You think you're having it for one thing, like, you know, making abortion legal or illegal. But in fact, once you have the convention and you open up the Constitution to potential other changes, and we know that the deep state is very good at controlling things. They will put their own people in, you know, as the representatives at the Constitutional Convention, and they will make changes. The Constitution, while it's not perfect, it's a document that still gives us our main protections of our civil rights. And the deep state wants to take them away. And maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, it's so critical to understand, Meryl. Thank you for mentioning that. Back in the 60s and 70s, they were actually trying to bring about a constitutional convention by using the liberals, telling them that they needed to amend the Constitution to bring about these changes. So there's a mechanism in Article 5 where you call a convention for proposing amendments. And they failed trying to use the liberals. Now they're trying to use the conservatives. Say, oh, the federal government's too big. It's too powerful. We need to limit its power. Of course, the Constitution already does limit its power, but they're not obeying it. That's the real significant problem. But the last time we had a constitutional convention, this was under the Articles of Confederation. The delegates were sent there to make some amendments to improve the Articles of Confederation. They ended up throwing out the Articles of Confederation and coming up with an entirely new constitution. And by the way, they even changed the mode of ratification. The original articles required unanimous consent among all of the states. The new constitution only required 3/4 before the Constitution could be considered ratified and enforced. And I guarantee you, if we end up calling such a convention, there will be another effort to make radical changes, maybe even throw the whole thing out, and then change the mode of ratification. They'll say, oh, that's outdated, that's undemocratic, that was invented by dead white guys who owned slaves, some of them. So why don't we just do a democracy? We'll have a 50% plus one vote, and if 50% plus one agree, we'll adopt this new constitution. They'll stuff the ballot boxes in LA and New York and Chicago or whatever, And we will lose the very document that for 200 and almost 50 years now has served a very crucial role in protecting our freedom. As you said, it's not perfect. There's another way for making amendments when we find defects in it that doesn't risk opening it up. And we can be absolutely sure that if this convention were to be called, it would be a fight like you can't imagine. Every special interest group would be involved. Every billionaire would be involved trying to control the process. It would be, in my opinion, a total disaster. And the only alleged benefit, adding a few more amendments for them to ignore, is entirely illusory because they already disobey it, right? What we need is them to obey it, not change it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope we can continue this conversation soon, maybe when everyone's gone through more of these Jeffrey Epstein documents and we understand even better what in fact they were building and where things stand. So I think this is the beginning of a conversation, and I hope you agree with me. I think the Jeffrey Epstein files are going to be central to beating back the deep state now that even more of the rot has been uncovered.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is critical. We're going to stay on it, and I'm very grateful for your efforts. Thank you so much, Meryl.
Yeah, so look at Alex's Substack from today. Look, you've got your book that you wrote that relates to this. Can you show it to the audience?
Deep State, the Invisible Government Behind the Scenes. I don't have a copy handy. Here's our newest book, Woke and Weaponized, How Karl Marx Won the Battle for American Education. But all of it's available on Amazon or our website. So.
Yeah, so please look into Alex, and I hope to have you back soon. Thank you. This was a great show.
Thank you so much, Meryl. Appreciate it.
All right, we are live. Tell us your name, please.
My name is Susana Rose.
And this is a story about your dog.
My dog, Sadie.
Tell us about it.
Sadie, we got her in 2007. She was a puppy, and we picked her up the day before her 8 weeks of age, before she turned 8 weeks of age. And the breeder told us that she was going to give the shots to the dogs and then keep the puppies for 1 to 2 days because she wanted to monitor them, and she gave them the shots as well. Sadie was a toy Manchester Terrier, and she was less than 2 pounds when we picked her up, so she was a tiny little puppy. I should have brought a picture of how tiny she was. My daughter actually was holding her in her hands like this, bringing her home. And so we picked her up, and everything was great. She was the cutest little thing ever. And then 2 weeks later, about 2 weeks later, she started having symptoms. She had swollen eyes and a swollen muzzle, and she just was like feeling tired. And so we took her to the vet. I can show you a picture of what she looked like at this point. I don't know, can you see it?
Yeah, keep it for a second. So those eyes are really, wow.
Yes, very big puffy eyes, and then she also had puffy muzzle, and like I said, she was just a little bit more tired than usual. So we took her into the vet to see what was going on, and the vet gave her some Benadryl first, and they thought, okay, well, maybe it's like a food allergy or a food sensitivity, and it didn't change. So she was like this. I have another picture of her too. She was like this for about 3 weeks before it actually resolved. And so the vet said that if it would have been a food sensitivity or a food allergy, the Benadryl would have resolved it. And so the vet basically diagnosed her with puppy strangles, and it's also called juvenile cellulitis, and has like another big long name too, which I won't tell you. But the vet felt like it was from the vaccinations. It is the only real way to diagnose it is to do a biopsy of the eyes and the lip tissue or something like that. And of course they weren't going to do that on such a tiny dog, so they decided that the next best way to diagnose it, which is very common, is just ruling everything else out, which is why we did the Benadryl and had we noted that didn't resolve. And puppy strangles is an autoimmune disease, and her vet felt like it came from the vaccinations. And it is not a super common disease, but it does happen sometimes in breeds like Dachshunds, which a toy Manchester Terrier may have a little bit of Dachshund in the breed mix. So,
so will you ever get your dogs any kind of vaccinations ever again?
After that, we did titers for her immunizations because she was too sensitive to everything else, and we skipped rabies as much as we could. So no, I would not give my dogs vaccinations. I think this is an important issue because here we are thinking about people and vaccinations and vaccine injuries for people, but I think it's just as important to talk about dogs. And for instance, with my dog, Sadie, she was tiny. So she was only 12 pounds at most ever, and when she was very little, she was only 2 or 3 pounds. So the thing about dog vaccinations is that they often give the same amount that they're going to give a really large dog, and that just doesn't make any sense. Especially, I think what they've started to do more for smaller dogs is give cat vaccinations, which makes more sense. But at this point, I think she was just getting the regular size vaccinations. And dogs are sick these days. Have you noticed how many dogs actually have chronic disease? And I think like every dog I know right now has some type of disease. And Sadie went on to have a seizure disorder. She had a neurological disorder where she shook all the time. We took her to the neurologist and they never really could fully diagnose it. She ended up with a heart disease and some gastrointestinal illnesses as well. So she is no longer with us. She crossed the Rainbow Bridge last year in March. She was just such a special dog for us. We loved her so much. And sorry, I'm crying because it is a little bit fresh still. But I feel like somebody needs to speak for the animals, because here we are giving them injections that are supposed to help them to be healthy and live long and healthy lives. And our dog didn't have that experience.
How long did she live for? How many years?
She lived for 15 years, 15 and a half years, which is a good long time. I am a nurse, and I was able to, provide good care for her. And she was mostly healthy, I would have to say, aside from, the illnesses that I talked about that she acquired in the, second half of her life. But I do also feel like, this could have been prevented, and she could have not had the puppy strangles, which affected her lymph nodes and her face, and she had that illness for, several weeks, and probably carried into some of her other chronic illness issues.
Has this experience helped you understand the danger of all vaccinations, including human?
Yes, so my mom was very much into looking into vaccines and not having us be fully vaccinated when we were younger, and then I did the same with my daughter. My daughter had a modified schedule, and now my granddaughter is here, and she's 4 years old. She was a patient of Dr. Paul's, and my daughter read Dr. Paul's vaccine-friendly plan and decided she would not vaccinate her daughter at all. And so my granddaughter is completely unvaccinated and 100% healthy. And so yes, I am all on board with no vaccines. I don't think people need it. I don't think animals need it. And just more and more information is coming out every day about how vaccinations are actually much more dangerous than the diseases that we're trying to prevent in both animals and humans.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.